Welcome to the Fight the Matrix episode today, here hosted over at Liberty.me. I have a great friend, fellow champion of liberty. We're going to talk about, Tyler Lloyd, we're going to talk about Minarchism. And my friend here has a lot of good background understanding of that subject, why people go into that particular realm, or I would say agnostic state. And we're going to pretty much take apart the delusion or say tyranny of Minarchism. So Tyler, would you like to introduce yourself? Say a little about who you are.
Yeah, I'm Tyler. You can find me on Liberty.me. I'm like number 6. But yeah, feel free to contact me there. I think I have like over 1,500 friends, and we really are going to be trying to break through the delusion that we need to fight the state, we need to fight the matrix, but we don't need to completely stop it. Like, we need to fight the matrix to a point, whereas here we're here to fight the matrix. And thanks for tuning in tonight.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, I guess, what is Minarchism? I personally don't think that, I would just use statism, right? A state is a state is a state. A status is a status is a status. They still advocate violating consent. They still advocate for government, political rulers, political gangs, right? And so Minarchism, the term that's used is like it's close to anarchy, minimal government, limited government. So how about Minarchism? And of course, the folks you'll find in there would be your Libertarian Party constituents, and you'll find maybe some third-party folks, but mostly your constitutionalists, your sovereign citizen guys. And so from there, you get Minarchism, minimal government, and so the two hyphenated, and then put together, you have Minarchy. So from there, I guess we could start off with why do people go into Minarchism?
That's a great question. So we're going to be talking about a political scale where we have libertarian here, maybe like constitutionalist somewhere in the middle, minarchist, and then you're going to have the anarchist right here. So people move along the scale. A lot of political opinions differ. But if you're a minarchist, you're going to be arguing that even from a libertarian government, there's still things you want the government to take care of or not take care of, and usually be stripping it back. So how much do you actually want to strip back? How much should you be taxed? How much should the government actually do? And it's an argument of whether or not we want every industry to be provided by the free market, or if we want some industry provided by the state. And right now, a lot of people want to argue it's 50-50, that we have a lot of services that are in fact monopolized by the state, but maybe they're better than if they were actually within the free market. And that's one of the ways in which minarchists are going to argue that we would still want like a consumption tax. We would still want maybe 5%. Like, it would definitely be cheaper.
All right.
Like, just pay us a little less and we can give you more freedom. And one of the weird thing about it is in human farming, if you ever watch Stefan Montalu's The Story of Your Enslavement, the more free the citizens, the less taxed they are, the more they actually economically produce. So by raising taxes, government, you might actually make more money.
So Minarchism. So yeah, you'll find, as you was mentioning, there's the spectrum. You have your right ideologies, left ideologies, and somewhere eventually you get to more freedom, as they say, towards Minarchism. And some would include anarchy on that line. I don't, right? Since anarchy is not a political position, no more than atheism is a religious belief. Anarchy is off the political line. And so you'll find there, I find it to be a realm in which people are stuck in that kind of agnostic state. Once they reach Minarchism, you'll say, I guess you'll find, I guess the common saying that people say, like, the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist is 6 months, and I beg to differ from most of my experience in meeting and talking with minarchists. That's not been the case. I found it faster from having someone who's a Republican or a Democrat to come to anarchism really fast, in one conversation. It doesn't have to take that long, those 6 months or 2 years, as they say. But we'll get to that part later. And so they'll say that 6 months to, or 2 years to get to anarchism. They forget to tell you that, there's also a decade of worth of political involvement there as, the Democrat or Republican before they got to a state of minarchy. Right, and those years add up, right? All those times add up. That's about 10 to 15 years, 12 to 15 years adding up when you find yourself still stuck in the idea of the matrix. Whereas you'll find when people talk about being introduced politically from that realm towards anarchism, yeah, people will hold on then to the ideas that change is a long progress. It takes a while. The people are not ready for it, and that's just because you've come to these ideas yourself through politics. And yes, and that will take a long time. Remember, in politics, you don't have to talk to anyone. All you have to do is just pull a lever, punch a chat in. No real honest conversation, no philosophy there. It's just a form of apathy, right? Spending spending a few hours every 4 years looking for parking, waiting in line. That's not real activism. That's not real engagement with your community. And yes, of course, it's going to take a long, long time. And I think we, as anarcho-capitalists or free market anarchists, we can do it faster. It doesn't have to take that long. And hopefully you guys watch the Spreading Anarchy videos to see like how fast people can understand the argument against the state in one easy, simple conversation. And I would say it's the most efficient way to introduce the message of freedom, if you're into that. So why do people come over to Minarchism? You could say, what was your reason? I guess you'd like to share.
I was really interested in the Gary Johnson campaign, and I guess that was 2012. And I voted for him, and I realized that being part of the 1% of the population that even cares about any of the issues I care about, maybe that's never going to actually accomplish anything. So I kind of gave up on the political system myself. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of ways to do it. Doug Stanhope is a great libertarian comedian, and he points out a lot of things in which, like, again, we're just not thinking very rationally.
All right. So you can find other reasons. It could be sentimental reasons why they go there and stay there for a while. You can find maybe them themselves are in the military, right? So you have some sentimental attachments. Maybe their parents, or it's the same reason why a person who will find it difficult to advocate against abolishing the monopoly on security of the police because one of their friends or their parents is a police extortionist themselves. So I find that to be similarly the case, why people stay in Minarchism. Someone in their family, someone close to them, is involved in the government, and so it's difficult for them to imagine abolishing all government, because then that would include, I guess, their vocation, right? Welfare vocation. Remember, every government agency and position is a welfare position. They're not a capitalistic organization. They're not producing real value. The source of the revenue, they're not consumer driven, right? The income and the salary that's paid for them is stolen, taken from someone else. So that would also include military positions, of course. And so we find a lot of reasons why they will be holding back and find it difficult to proceed further from that state of agnosticism, the pothole to the road of freedom. So that's what I've come to find. Maybe that's why it's difficult for them to proceed forward. But then again, maybe they've never heard of anarcho-capitalism, and that you could privatize everything, right? Minarchism is a form of, what areas do you know that they advocate for monopolizing?
Great question, and I'll start getting into the notes here. So we agree, like minarchists will agree with you that anti-statism is a good thing. We mostly just disagree whether or not anti-statists can even take the state that far. We don't know if there's actually enough people that won't be sheeple, if you will. Yeah, anarchy is not possible, and there's a lot of reasons why people say you can strip the government down to where it's effective at, again, monopolizing three basic services: security, the production of law, and the social contract. So you're going to be arguing that all three of those are against consent. You're going to be arguing that with anarcho-capitalism, you can actually live in a community that's actually based on consent. We can construct a social construct. We can produce our own laws, and we don't need to monopolize security. Security firms actually aren't that complicated. Like, it'd be really nice if you had a police force that wasn't abusive to the consumer, as we're seeing a lot with
right,
crazy
or one that is consumer-driven, right? Don't forget, the Supreme Court has ruled in many cases, such as in Winnebago versus Duchesne County, that the police have no constitutional duty or obligation to provide you protection of your life, liberty, or property. So that doesn't exist. Therefore, you can conclude then there exists no such thing as citizenship, because then if there's no, you give allegiance to a state, in return you get protection, but if there's no protection, there's no allegiance, then there's no citizen. And so that kind of knocks out the folks who advocate that, I guess, for minarchism, and that the Constitution, we've kind of tripped over, we need to go back to the original words, but that's how we got here to begin with. that's how this the United States started off with, right? The most limited, the most smallest form of government, the least form of taxation. Aside from, I guess, from George Washington's whiskey tax. And one exception of immorality, one exception to their own form of conduct and what they believe is good. Again, they'll say it's wrong for you to steal, we'll call it taxes. And each little of those exceptions starts to add on. You create this whole web of lies and mythology in order to justify that tyranny, hurting other people. And it doesn't stop there. So, you've already had that chance for minarchism, and it's failed, right? And not so much when you look at the Libertarian Party today that's been launched in 1971, they've had decades to show a measure of success. Here in the tax farm, Virginia, you have Sarvis, who ran and achieved 6%. 6%. That was bad. At that rate, we'll surely die as tax slaves. And of course, given that there exists no factual evidence that politics or voting has ever set anyone free, it's time to start a new strategy, time to develop a different way of communicating these ideas, very important messages, and that's the anti-political campaign that we're part of against that tyranny. Remember, the state exists only in here, right, in our minds, against the minds of those who hold the idea that, or been misled, right, tricked, indoctrinated, I would say a majority have, into supporting the state. But of course, when we have these conversations with them and helping define their moral values, still find that the state tricks them then into compromising those values to begin with. And so you'll find there, I guess, the minority few who still advocate, those are your minarchisms for whatever sentimental reason, that they can't apply the same logic and reason of which why government should stay out of the market in particular services that have been monopolized, like USPS and their monopoly on first-class mail, delivering pieces of paper. That the same argument also should be applied towards the production of security, the production of law. The Constitution, again, is an easy one to debunk. It's not a real contract, right? How many people signed it?
I didn't remember. I didn't write it down.
Zero people signed it. They signed it and were of, which is the same as taking it to a notary and having the person who witnesses this is a legit, authentic document, and then they sign their name and witness that, yes, this event took place. This document was here. But they never signed it as being held responsible to the terms and conditions of that contract. So right off the bat, Constitution is meaningless. And
I didn't find my name there.
Yeah,
I didn't find my name there. So that's the thing about like social contracts. Like we can make them, they can be real, but right now they're monopolized. So this kind of moves into the psychology behind a lot of minarchists. We're going to give you another dose of the red pill, where when you argue for societies based on consent, and when you want people to not violate the non-aggression principle, you understand how taxation is theft, and that does have a effect on the market. So in a lot of ways, they're going to be arguing that man's natural state is war. And one of the reasons why Memorial Day is such a big day is because there's men and women who believe they're fighting and dying for your freedom, for your sole existence. There are men in other countries all around the world, like making sure that you can, have your 9 to 5, your regular, what you're doing here now is actually a privilege based on what these people are doing. And I think in a lot of people, it comes down to property rights, a lot with anarcho-capitalist property rights, where whether or not your right to property is an inherent part of your personhood, or if it is a privilege granted by the majority or the collective. And again, whether or not that violates the NAP is how a lot of people are going to be arguing about minarchism or any form of transcription by a central entity.
All right, the ideas of minarchism are not consistent. They advocate that all taxations, they call it that is theft, but of course, when you're creating your own government, how are you going to fund yourselves? Through taxation itself, through theft, right? They'll say that, yes, society's interactions should be voluntary and consensual. All right, great. Let's stop right there. But no, they'll continue to say, but we'll still need a government, which of course does what? Violate consent, place people in involuntary positions without their consent or choice, right? Violence. And so you'll find that they're hypocritical, I guess, in that stance and those viewpoints that they already hold. And again, why they can't dislodge it. There's a lot of reasons. We'll go over that afterwards, and how to what to do with minarchists, right? And so you'll find that minarchism is still very much against consent, is very much still against voluntary relationship. It still supports theft. It still supports murder, right? What happens if you don't obey or submit, right, to their ideas or delusions of the perfect government? You get thrown into another cage, right? So don't let the very close to almost freedom that they're trying to get to deceive you. They're very much are advocates of tyranny, or perhaps they themselves want to see themselves as their political ruler or their tyrant. So how do we get past the contracts? I mean, you find contracts all the time in many of the services that you already subscribe to: Netflix, AT&T, your car payment services. When you go to a landlord and sign the tenant agreements, those are contracts. How do we get to a larger scale community contracts? If you look at an example of like the Amish, they have one in which the rules do not apply. The mutual agreements of rules, right, of laws of rights, do not apply to children. And so much that they cannot give consent to them because they're babies. Of course, if you still advocate for the Constitution, you're advocating forcing contracts onto babies. That's to give you some pause to think about that for a second, right? It's binding the posterity, and the term that they have in the Constitution, that means enslaving the youth, enslaving the young. So don't let the constitutionalists deceive you. They still advocate for slavery, just their form of slavery, just a slavery that's fine and fit for them. They just want just a little bit of statism, just a little bit of tyranny.
But you need a government. You're going to need a central body, and this is going to be the minarchist argument. Regardless, you're going to need a security force that is somewhat collectivized to have diplomacy with other governments. Like if you did have a statist society, what's keeping those people free? What's making sure they wouldn't evolve into another state? And a lot of minarchists believe that even if like anarchy is possible, almost overnight, microstates will start springing up. Even Athens and Sparta, these were what we call the city-state. These were just communities that were localized. They had local government, and they did things by consensus. Not Sparta. So yeah, how do you make sure that these privatized security firms, either one, aren't fueling the industrial prison complex, so we're not going to make arbitrary laws to make sure we can enslave more people in your community, or two, just duke it out with people who have disputes. So if we have a dispute and I've got enough money to litigate, we could actually litigate with bullets instead of paper and contracts. And this is the Hobbesian myth is that man's natural state is at war with other men. So please take the cynicism out of that and explain what a true social contract would do to alleviate problems and how we would resolve disputes.
Yeah, so I guess if you free up the market right now, you have a government monopoly on law, right? You have a monopoly on security, and that's not. You find some areas in which contracts can be enforced through like private means to businesses through Etsy and eBay and resolving their conflict disputes, and you'll just free up a market of a lot of agencies that could do that. Be a market in which when you enter the courtroom of the arbitrator, it's the arbitrator, the judge, that stands up when you enter, right? You're the consumer, you're the paying client. And so when you find, of course, you first have to realize that the only thing that a judge is just a person, an individual who just provides an honest opinion, a fair and impartial opinion on a dispute. And so then you have that available in many of the business services that exist today. And you'll find that removing the government on law, these people can be held liable for their own actions. You can't sue a state judge. And of course, that's why they're able to find a lot of, misinterpretations of the Constitution or property rights, right? They'll find excuses and ways to go around. It doesn't matter if they mess up because they're not liable for their own actions. And not so much you can't sue a state prosecutor. And why it's hard to sue any government official or police extortionists themselves. So in a market, you'll find real respect for private property the moment that one agency goes rogue, as they say, one security company. You'll find all the other security companies have had contracts with one another to take down would-be bullies, to take down Mad Max tyrants like Austin Peterson, if he chose to go that route himself. Remember, don't forget, warlords have already taken over, right? We don't have, this is their post-apocalypse. There is no law here. Remember, the rules that they created have exceptions for the political ruling class, for the tyrants themselves. It's wrong for you to steal. We'll just call it taxes again. So you don't have law. You don't have security. This is your post-apocalypse, right? The characteristic traits that apply to what kind of genre, what kind of role that is, that's what you have today. Your warlords or your city council members or your governors or your presidential political rulers. They decide what you can and cannot do with your own body. They decide when they want to take your land, right? Your private property, eminent domain, property tax. So all this wild scenarios that minarchists fear that could happen, when you abolish government, already exists today, right? So already they can't denote or look at the realization of reality, right? Right now they're acting for aspiring for utopian ideals, that there is a perfect government if you limit tyranny, if you limit evil, right? So that's the problem you have with minarchists. They're not consistent with their ideals.
As far as it is from the anarchist perspective, one of the things they do agree with anarchists a lot on is ending the Fed and decentralizing currency. That's a pretty good way to start a conversation with a minarchist. And who knows, maybe one day they'll actually agree with real social contracts. Right. So we just got a question about the three questions themselves. If that's something you want to go into?
Yeah, we'll do the questions after. If you guys just list them up here, I'm copying, pasting, and then we'll go over each one of them. So we're just going to go down here really quick here. So most of the minarchists I've met, monopoly law, monopoly in security, monopoly on patterns of information, the ones I met. There's some that finally started to let go. And that's kind of what you have. They have this Hobbesian view that everyone's evil sort of thing, that you'll always have tyrants, or you'll always have these bullies. And for them, their choice really is to run away from freedom, is to submit. Right, is to proceed with the cowardly act of submission instead of strategizing and finding other alternatives to achieving freedom. And that actually involves talking with one another. That actually involves spreading this information of education. Remember, politics doesn't do anything. Politics in itself is a conversation of how best to rule the lives of other people. That's it. It's the language of slaves. So you'll find some of the excuses that they have. I guess we can go. That I've come across would be, statism isn't going anywhere anytime soon. In the meantime, I'll prefer a benevolent minarchist to be in charge. Again, what you'll find in that advocation, you're advocating for a political rule. You're advocating for political party gangs. You're advocating for people to submit. That's what minarchism is. The whole thing encompasses. Democrats is like a larger version of it. Republicans like just contained status quo where it is today, right? The size and scope of state has never gone smaller.
They're just going to keep juggling. So now you're going to have the libertarian ball there, and the Republicans, the Democrats, and the libertarians are just going to keep juggling. And you think you have a choice, but really it's just nationalism. Right. Again, last argument from the minarchist. I don't think an anarcho-capitalist society is even possible, but I agree with you that having these discussions about the use of force in government is important. And anti-statism, fighting against the state, can be productive. It can be a good thing that can better the world. But to what point or to what degree is that productive? Like,
what was your response to that?
Well, that was my question. But again, that was just an ending note where, again, if we go completely anti-state, maybe it could actually be destructive by the time we get full anarchy.
I don't think so. I mean, you look at the areas of like Eastern Europe, people think it's going to be violent revolutions when the economy collapses, when the government collapses. But you look at examples in history that wasn't the case. Very peaceful transition. You look at, again, Eastern side of Europe when the USSR collapsed. There wasn't this big war. There wasn't all this large bloodshed going on in between those states. And when the USSA or the United Tax Farms of America collapses, you'll find the similar thing. Maybe some places, sure. We don't have a magic crystal ball, but what we can do, knowing the assurance that inevitably it's unsustainable and it will collapse, we can prepare ourselves for that transition. And Bitcoin's a great way towards that, right? Starting off within our own interpersonal relationships, within our community at large, to help prepare for that transition is a great place to start. Politics is not. Politics just delays and prolongs the inevitable. Just prolongs violence. Doesn't offer any solution. It's just a form of distraction to thinking that, yes, government can still set you free. So And the area, sometimes they'll say, well, government isn't going to abolish itself. They'll say that. Well, you will have, have heard of some agencies, like one in Florida, realizing that they don't fulfill any function, and they just abolish that administration themselves. But I guess you're talking about, I mean, what is government? Is just a group of individual people who advocate use of violence on one another, right, to solve their, that's just the same definition of a state. What is a state? A group of individual people who advocate violence to solve their personal or community problems. And the people who advocate for that are very few, a minority few, right? When the many of us realize that we've been duped, we've been tricked, we've been misled into compromising our moral values, we outnumber them. Right, at that point, you can launch social ostracism day, and that's much you'll find a tattoo parlor in Texas saying that no police extortion is allowed at their inside their store. Right, those who have the badge insignia of police extortionists are not welcomed, and that's the direction we need to go. Kind of have to put that moral line and alignment with your values and your activities. It doesn't just exist here on Facebook, on the online world. We kind of have to move away from there and bring it out into the real. So we have some excuses that I've come across. Also, another one would be, what if we held an election and no one voted? Will the people in power just step down? Will the police turn their guns in? Will the wardens open the cells and the soldiers come home? So like if no one voted, we've kind of covered this in the past. All that would mean is that, there's already tiny few minority who already do. The market that we're going after is everyone else who doesn't. The market is everyone else who's not, to be honest, a minarchist or communist. It's very easy to have these conversations with the Republicans or Democrats. Very easy to tailor the message of freedom to the areas of where their concern is, in which they've been misled into believing that the government provides. Right, with Republicans, all respect for private property, right? That's their cash point. That's their, you can say honeypot. Democrats, they care for one another, I guess, in instance of like welfare organizations and programs. And you can point out friendly societies, mutual aid societies, and how they worked. And they provided unemployment insurance and health insurance before government got in the way and shut them down. And all now you have is this exorbitant amount of people dependent on the state. Whereas before the welfare program came in, it was dropping down dramatically. So what happens if no one votes? Well, that's great. We've accomplished a lot. It's not just not pulling the lever, right? That's not the form of activism that anarchists advocate for, right? You look at agorism. Minarchism is all about pulling that lever. That is the only kind of activism that they advocate for. That's the only tool, pushing buttons, pushing chads in. So yeah, people who don't vote, people will come to accept peaceful parenting. They'll come to accept a lot of the wealth of information, education that we've been presenting in the past, few decades here in Richmond, the past 3 years. They'll find that we can create our own free society based on consent outside of government, which again is only ruled by a few minority. So I guess we'll go over some of the questions here that we have here. We have one of the first ones, interesting ones. Like, I'm looking forward to using Bitcoin smart contracts. Do either of you have experience with those? Nope. I think they're great in for marriage contracts is an interesting thing that you can now get married on the blockchain, just mostly as a public, I guess, confirmation validation that such events and took place. And it's a way that I guess Nicosia University for Bitcoin is using to validate degrees on there as well, which is an interesting uses of the blockchain. Back then, I think there was a person who came across, spotted Pluto, and the way that he was able to verify was sending himself a postage stamp, right? And it'll come back to him, and then he can validate the timestamp. With blockchain, that's no longer needed. You no longer need to support your organized monopoly on mail. You can do it through the blockchain. It's time-stamped and everything. You can do a wide variety of contracts, relationships with one another. And hopefully a lot of people who are into that start looking away from government, especially in terms of marriage contracts, to going towards the blockchain. I think you have, was it Louisiana that absolved government contracts, marriage contracts? It was very recently. I think they just took it off the books. Government should never be involved in it in the first place, and I think that's kind of interesting. So yeah, Bitcoin contracts, not yet used it myself, but I look forward to to that. We have another question here.
But that's a very interesting idea. And again, like we can run a society off a website and that's peacefully associated, or how minarchism could evolve in the future. Like, again, don't be transcripted into running your website or running your whole society off of again, the blockchain is supposed to be about confirming contracts within the transaction. So again, decentralizing or polycentric law, how that would actually play out. A lot of paperwork, but
yeah. The next question we have here is, when you ask the 3 questions to anarchy, to a minarchist, I'm sure they respond with the moral answers to those questions. What kind of excuses do they come up with when they're aware that government only exists through force or the threat of force? How do they justify the inherent violence of the state? And the ones I've come across tend to be very Hobbesian.
It's a deterrent. It's a deterrent. If the state didn't use violence, other people would use violence, and we'd live in a like much less safe society. Like, it's okay for us to monopolize violence, because as long as that's where it is, that's where we'll know it is, and we just don't need to deal with it. And again, private security won't be out there creating violence within your community. And that's one of the ways we can argue against the state. Hey, no, like, you kind of messed up these people's living arrangements, you messed up these people's livelihoods, you just straight ruined a few people's lives, or you've killed them. It all depends on what degree of statism you're trying to, again, force or impose through your votes.
All right. And they do answer consistently. They do answer, it's like, an agreement against the initiation of force. The only legitimate use of force would be to defend yourself from that initiation. That is violently wrong to violently force your ideas onto other people. They do answer those consistently, which is the interesting, of course. But then, of course, when we come to a discussion of government, you'll find some excuses in there, and the excuses, like, just breaking down, just feels like they just can't trust other people. They have a negative viewpoint of other people. They tend to look down on others. They belittle others, and that's I don't know, a very negative mindset to have, and which is why they advocate for politics. Again, you don't have to, you force your viewpoints on others through politics, through voting. You don't have to discuss this with other people. So yeah, they've already had this misanthropic, curmudgeon outlook of life on other people, and that's what the Hobbesian viewpoint is, that everyone's evil and they're out to get you and you can't communicate to them. And you'll just call them names, you'll call them monkeys, you'll call them dumb, stupid, and that's just how they view society. So it's interesting for a minarchist to advocate for like a solution, how to provide these services to society. They don't even believe in you. They don't even believe in society or in community. They've abandoned community for brutes of force. They've abandoned their friends and family, believing that they can't understand this, so they have to force it onto them. The very thing that they're against. So yeah, those are the excuses I've come across. And for me, I guess the way I handle it is, well, I guess, hey, come to our monthly freedom gatherings and come meet other people in which you don't have to be afraid of. None of these people are going to hurt you. All these people have respect for private property, for self-ownership. Maybe seeing a community like that may help let go of those negative sentimental values or that they hold. Maybe that's something they've just never seen before. Other than that, it just takes time. Can take a year, can take 2, can take a long while. But again, because of that, I would say like the most efficient way to use your time is to just talk to everyone else that's not a minarchist or a communist. I'll talk to anyone who wants to have these conversations, of course, but I'm not going to set out to convince somebody. I'm not really set out to convince anyone. I'm just presenting facts, right? Presenting information. When you're ready to let go, cool, awesome.
So that was one of the things, like if you go to the LRVA Media Support YouTube channel, you can see us having a lot of these conversations, and the people who either disagree with the 3 questions or flatly deny the 3 questions even have moral value. They're either minarchist or staunch communist. And those debates do get heated. And if you do find yourself in a political situation where you brought up anarchy or you felt like you wanted to backpedal, you just didn't want to call someone a dirty statist, You can end it more politely by saying, well, maybe one day I hope you will see that violence will not set us free. And again, we are still breaking the cognitive dissonance of whether or not the state is actually helpful or harmful to the consumer. So yeah, and addressing the S word. If you don't know what statism is, if you don't know what the word statist means, it's kind of where we are right now within anarchism. So I wrote it was probably my first article published here on Liberty.me, where it's called Addressing the S Word. And thanks for your help on that, man. I really appreciate your help doing that. And do we have more questions here?
I guess this would be a good point to tell us about your area of relationship with Minarchism that you had. So how long would you say you were involved in that, I guess, in the past? What was your background in towards what got you into Minarchy?
I don't know, man. Like, I didn't really bother much with politics in high school, and I kind of slept through civics. So a lot of people already kind of knew I was libertarian. They just didn't tell me that because they were like, "Oh no, he's gonna talk. He's gonna contradict everything we're saying." Like no, it's cool. It's cool. Right. So yeah, man. Like, and then you just find contradictions within things, and you just try to think critically. And I felt like it was kind of intellectual purgatory. And then moving on to like how you educate yourself. So I saw like a lot of like edutainment about political philosophy. And I think it's like Julie Borowski, she's so funny. And she was one of the first people I saw who, libertarian girl, the token libertarian girl. And it was really cool to hear about other people I could agree with. And again, if you listen to Doug Stanhope, I know he's kind of a raunchy comic, but he does point out a lot of these contradictions too within government. And I'm not trying to rep Alex Jones too hard, but yeah, I mean, I understand what's up with the prepper community and the current militia movements.
So he does talk a lot about the Fed. Cool. I guess when you've been introduced, I guess, to anarcho-capitalism, you were mentioning, I guess, there's how long did it take then for you to like, you know what, there's these inconsistencies here, and to move forward from that?
Yeah, no, you really do have to look at it from a different perspective of whether or not removing the violence from the state will actually create a better society. And like, we don't know how to do that. Like, that's a really big question. Like, we'll get back to you because I think I've said it a few other times too, where if I'm going to argue that the state is actually producing crime or producing criminals, we're going to have to deconstruct how the state actually interacts with us interpersonally. And if that is a negative experience, if that's a lose-lose situation for not only the victim, but also the person who's being accused of a crime, then yeah, no one's going to like the state, and nobody's going to feel like they are safe or comfortable to go to them for remediation. And this is why there's so much violence on the streets, because like it's the, I guess they call it street justice or whatever. But if you just want to kill people who wrong you because you don't actually have a legal alternative to resolve that dispute. And that's kind of how the drug war is right now. Like, we don't even go there, but.
So yeah, that's been I guess our experience with Minarchism. To be honest, I guess the best thing you could do, still have those conversations. Ignore them if you want to, and just keep pressing forward. Right, our market is everyone else who's not been provided a good definition of some of these terms of what it is. What is theft? Right, what is morality? What is government? What is the state? What is capitalism? What is socialism? The weird part is that with Minarchism, they know those terms. They just don't apply that, I guess, principally towards their own ethics. In terms, even though holding these values, do you still act on those values that you have, or are they opposite?
So like, to preserve your personal private property, I kind of need to violate your personal private property. Right. Can I get just 5%, man? Come on, just give me 5%, dude. Like, come on, man. Like, it's okay. It's gonna be better. It's just 5%, man. And no, like, we don't play extortion.
Right. Look, they're going to say any lie and excuses just to legitimize that theft. Right. That's how this stuff starts. Right. Never trust any would-be political ruler who seeks that throne. They'll say anything to get elected, to have that power to control the lives of others. So we have another question here that says, how do you see a transition occurring from a stateless society to a statist society to a stateless society? Say that we got the majority of society to agree to a stateless society. What happens then? But then how do you prevent a government from existing without violence? That's kind of what we're working here in Richmond. We just celebrated our 3rd year anniversary here in Richmond, Virginia, in the tax farm. And the solution that we have is, I guess there's multiple attacks towards abolishing tyranny. And the first one, of course, change. There's two types of, I guess, tyranny you're fighting against, right? There's the external, there's the government, the idea, the abstract concept, and then there's the internal, right? Areas in which you yourself let go of some of these contradictions, or some of the inconsistencies, or some of the indoctrination that we've all been misled into believing. Great way to, of course, working on that is economically, right? Studying, getting with one another. Bitcoin's a great way. Stoicism, we have a weekly Stoicism meeting here in Richmond. It's about 2-3 hours. Great place to start internalizing and freeing the mind. And so some of these, of course, the areas of freeing the mind, that includes like peaceful parenting, right? Especially for parents. We have a lot of parents here who've moved forward with that, which is great. Abolishing the tyranny that begins at home first, right? And so, there's a lot of different multiplier avenues towards abolishing statism. And educational outreach is one of them. We do monthly gatherings here to kind of help promote, there at that one period of time at our gatherings, you have a free society based on consent. Each individual that's there respects each other's private property, respects each other's self-ownership. We have the non-aggression principle in display there, right? As well with the don't be an asshole principle, right? And so, that exists weekly here, that exists monthly here. Hopefully in August, we're going to do our Freedom Festival, Anarchon. So hopefully that'll exist in a larger, grander scale for us to see. And I think that's kind of in the direction we kind of have to move as freedom activists. Help bring in the people that surround you in your own community already, and start there, right? I mean, online and social media formats are great as a networking connection, but we need to spend some time as well into liberating our own community, within our own interpersonal relationships. So the transition will be easy. When you only need, as they say, some studies have pointed out, a good 10% to help change the paradigm shift of like some kind of ideology, as long as they're not they're persistent. That is, I guess you could say, not inconsistent and worthwhile. To have that bravery, that courage, and more integrity to keep pushing forward, and you'll come across eventually. You'll build a great anarchist society, anarchist community. And so from there, as that continues to grow, it doesn't go backwards, right? When you see the matrix for what it is, you can't plug yourself back in, right? Without forgetting everything, like Cypher tried to do. So during that transition, you have a good, strong minority, you have a good 10%, and you just, at that point, you could launch, which is part of our plan, to launch Social Ostracism Day. All of us, a good 10,000 people, to stop paying, stop giving into the fears of the threat of taxation. You can still do this until we get to that point, but all of us together in unison, we can do this, right? We can protect each other's property from the extortionists that will come and take them away because they didn't pay property taxes. Businesses can stop charging sales taxes. And so this is a strategy that we have that will come together and push forward. Right now in Richmond, we have, the last estimate was over 100 ANCAPs. So we do counts every summer, and that's something we'll keep pushing forward to. So the transition is realizing it here in the now and the real, and that just continues to grow, right? Those communities, the party that we had over the weekend, that was very real. There was a lot of great, awesome people there, a lot of anarchists there.
It was really fun. And I think one of the things I got out of it was we don't need to use the violence of the state to stoke the fire of civilization. Let's leave civilization to the civilized.
Right. So the tradition would be eventually we reach a certain good critical size. We can launch Social Ostracism Day. You ostracize, again, the few minority who do most of the violence. They're police extortionists, they're political rulers, right? Really, really tiny few minority that do most of the violence, that do the controlling of lives of other people. And so you don't invite them to your place of business, your stores, your restaurants, your hotels, your home, right? You don't smile at them. You don't give them any attention. You don't say hi to them, right? And eventually they'll realize, hey, my friends, my family, they're part of Liberty RVA. They're part of this Liberty community here. It's like, what have I been doing, right? And some have let go of that already. We have a good friend here in Richmond who used to be a former cop, and have let go. And as so much, we have many ex-military folks as well who have let go of Minarchism and the constitutionalism, the idea you can force contracts onto other people. as long as they're opening and welcoming, people can't let go, right? And they'll find, especially near the end, that they're the tiny few and they want to have electricity and want to have be part of this community, that they'll have to let go of those beliefs and ideas as well. Remember, that's really the fight. That's really how do you prevent from government from beginning again without violence? Peaceful parenting is a great way. Raise a generation of peaceful people to continue pushing forward these peaceful ideas. And remember, and statism and the idea of government, it gives us here in our heads, right? It's not yelling at the Fed building that's going to make it disappear. It's having these real conversations with one another, to sharpen your art of rhetoric, to help dislodge some of the stuff that we've been misled into believing, right? The lies, the myths, the hypocrisy of the idea that the social contract is a real contract, that the police exist to protect you, the idea that you're free, right? The only freedom that the Constitution allows is the idea for you to believe that you're free, and that's it. You're a slave or otherwise.
Ask not what your government can do for you, but what you can do for your government.
Right. So that's how it just it's the battle of ideas, the battle of words. That's where the real war is. And these you just look around, all these people in your community, they're I guess they're anarchists. They're as close as possible you can get to meeting real anarchists. They're just waiting for you to introduce yourself, to have these conversations, to plant the seeds of freedom.
So what were those 3 questions again?
Yeah, so the 3 questions you'll find, I'll provide a link later. And so the 3 questions, so it's a format, right? Before we engage, like in boxing, before we box, let's agree to the certain rules, right? Nothing below the waist, no ear biting Mike Tyson, and then we can box, right? We can engage in activity in which we consented to the rules and to the consequences. Same thing you want to have with a lot of these discussions, very important discussions and topics in which you want to set it up in a way that helps define the terms. So that way there's no confusion afterwards. That way it doesn't go all over the place. And I show the first question would be, in your day-to-day life, to use violence to solve your personal problems. Defining the term there would be, violence would be defined as placing a person in an involuntary position without their consent or choice, i.e. rape, murder, theft, and assault, all violations of body ownership. And of course, the question isn't, have you ever, is in your day-to-day life, do you consistently violate people's consent? And it's like, oh no, of course not. Second question would be, with the exception of self-defense, not really so much an exception, but would you consider it wrong or more to initiate that violence then? Right, absolutely, right? For the area's exception of defending yourself from that initiation and from that of the others that can't protect themselves. And then the last question would be, would you therefore consider it wrong and immoral to violently force your ideas onto other people? Versus rationalizing, persuasion, having these conversations. If you didn't like what I had to say, you can walk away, ignore me, ostracize me. But if I come after you, grab you by the shoulder, and then threaten you, you have to do what I say. You have to listen. Then I'm violently forcing my ideas. All right, voting, right, politics, government. You'll find people consistently answer the same way, that that it's wrong to initiate force, that it's wrong to violently force their ideas, that the only reasonable use of force will be in self-defense. It's a great starting point. That shows me then, do we have this more integrity, right? And now I could describe what is government, paint that brush picture, and then we can have a conversation. And the conversations after that are so easy after that. It's just out of curiosity. Now, what about the roads? Perfect. What about security, law? Perfect. We can get there now. The conversations are now organized. It's a great way to kind of lead in towards the message of freedom. Whereas in Minarchism, they trick you into thinking you can have freedom through just a limited form of evil, just a little bit of tyranny, and you get stuck in that agnostic state. So when people talk about politics as a means of spreading these ideas, I disagree. I think it's very dangerous. It prolongs needlessly the violence that of all these people are already suffering in, and we could do it much faster and simpler and in a much efficient way by just having these conversations with one another. Again, politics avoids human contact. It just tricks people into having this agnostic state of being stuck in the speed bump or the pothole towards the road of freedom, and they get stuck there for a very long time. We're not here to trick people or lie to them. We're not here to mislead them towards Minarchism. We want to go all the way towards real freedom that's understandable and that's attainable.
And that's not something you'd be voting for.
Right. So that's Minarchism in a nutshell here. We see here, nice to see fellow Virginians on board with good ideas, originally from Winchester. Oh, nice. We're actually, one of the places we're thinking about, we might be finalizing the campground is the Cove near Winchester. They have a target shooting range. So it seems like so far we're checking other prospects, but that might end up being it. So yeah, back in your hometown.
Sorry, this is a sketchy question.
Yeah. So as a follow-up question, do you think a societal collapse is necessary? Is a necessary precursor to a stateless society? I would say you already have a societal collapse. This is your collapse. The deterioration of currency, of the lack of security. Again, this is your post-apocalyptic world. We're already there. How do we get out of there? By spreading these messages, by having these conversations, by confronting would-be tyrants. Spreading peaceful parenting, having weekly community roundtable discussions, monthly freedom gatherings. Just continue to grow that community. So I think it's not so much that's inevitable. I mean, societal collapses will always be there. That's Detroit, that's Richmond here. That's everywhere. There's no societal stabilization. You look at DC, it's been around for a long time, capital of the murderocracy, and they've always had problems in southeast portion of that city. Lots of murders occur there. Baltimore, the same thing. I think it's always has collapsed. And what do we do now with that information? Could it get worse? Yeah. But again, it doesn't have to get to that point in which it would be a bloodbath. Again, the Eastern tax funds of Europe didn't collapse in such a manner when the USSR broke down. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case here as well. And so all we have to do now is just help transition towards that peaceful society. And
anarcho-capitalism can always beat anarcho-cannibalism any day of the week. We can figure it out, man. It can still be voluntary.
Right. So with that, I think that pretty much sums up, I guess, our tearing apart the minarchist delusion that just a little bit of evil is enough to provide peace. When again, the goal is to still hurt peaceful people. Again, the goal is still to violate consent. There's nothing peaceful or consensual about minarchism. Most people hold on to them for sentimental reasons and for the worst ideals as well, because they believe that they can't trust you with freedom, and they look down, criticize, and belittle everyone else around them, right? That's not a benevolent person, as they say, benevolent ruler that sometimes people would want to replace what we have today. There's someone who looks down on you like a sack of meat, like an ant, like an insect. That's not the kind of person I would want to associate myself with, or think about this person, knows what's good for the community when he looks down on them and has already given up on them. And
these people are already not very popular. Like, you ask your average American who their local senator is, the majority of them aren't going to know. Like, Americans have already kind of left the state, but they don't really care. They just don't want the state to intrude on them. And that's a big thing about statism, is it's always an imposition of the collective on the individual, regardless of whether or not the ideal is equality or liberty.
Right. And again, minarchists can't get out of there, of course. I think continue the conversation. If they want to still talk, I'm always open for that. They want to come over and check out our gatherings and have more conversation, that'd be great. I haven't met a lot of minarchists who will let go, but I guess here in Richmond, that's a really tiny few of the people who are market anarchists and anarcho-capitalists. A large majority of them have come from socialist positions, from Democratic or Republican background. So for me, we find it as a great proof of a measure of success that we can do this without voting and without politics, without surrendering your principles, compromising your ethics, your integrity, that we can go all the way by just reaching out to one another, by showing them what a community of what a free society of people does look like. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, for the great questions, for your participation, for the patience. And this is Kal Molinet.
This is Tyler Lloyd.
See you guys at the Victory Party. Take good care.
Peace.